And it just was blah, blah, blah. Hey y'all, my name is Nat. I hope you're having a terrific day today. And for this video, we're going to be talking about every book that I decided not to finish in 2024. Alright, before I get to anything bookish, make sure to hit like and subscribe down below, as well as tell me in the comments what's the last book that you decided not to finish. Unfortunately, I actually went up a little bit this year when looking at my stats. Last year, I only DNF'd 19 books. This year, I DNF'd 21. That's not a lot. I mean, it's only a difference of 2, but still. However, I am always glad to see that I am still DNFing books. I definitely believe that not finishing books that you're not enjoying is self-care. You should not have to push through a book that you are not liking. I get it, it's hard. Sometimes you wonder whether or not the ending is going to pay off. But in my experience, I find that if you're really struggling with the book, if you're having a hard time picking it up, if you're constantly dreading returning to it, chances are that finale is not going to be worth it. I'd rather spend my time reading books that I'm actually enjoying, where the whole entire process of the story is a good time for me. So with that said, we are going to talk about the 21 books that I decided not to finish this year. Starting at the top in January, I unfortunately did not finish The Beauty Myth by Naomi Wolf. This was a nonfiction book that I was actually really excited for. I picked it up for my feminist reading vlog that came out in March. I'll put a link to that in the cards. This book came out in the 90s and it was very impactful at the time because it was really talking about this myth that's created in our society around beauty. The impact that beauty standards have on so many different aspects of our everyday lives. And that's a topic that I find really fascinating personally. However, I just had a hard time with this author's writing style. I think I maybe got like 80 pages. I actually can check my stats for that. No, I got about 60 pages in and I had already come across 2 really major claims that the author didn't cite sources for, and that's definitely always a red flag in my opinion. Along with that though, it also felt very verbose and overwritten. This nonfiction book read more like an academic paper than something that is geared towards an open audience of anybody. Plus, I didn't enjoy the way Wolf was writing about the creation of beauty standards and how it was this patriarchal thing that almost came across like a conspiracy that men were creating in order to keep women down. Again, the writing style with this author just did not work for me personally. I was really bummed that this was a dud for me, but thankfully I do have a few other books that kind of tackle the same topic on my TBR, so here's hoping that one of those will work better for me in the future. Now, in February, unfortunately I did actually DNF 3 books. It was a pretty DNF heavy month, actually. Starting at the top was a book that was actually from my 10 books for 2024 list, and that was Heart-Shaped Box by Joe Hill. This one was on that 10 books list because it was the oldest book on my Goodreads TBR. I added it in like 2019, I think, and still had yet to get around to it. I liked the idea of this book following this retired rock star who is really fascinated by like all the things dark and macabre, and he collects all these like really unusual and sometimes like questionably ethical artifacts and things. It felt like it was so drawn out. This was also a book where I had a very difficult time connecting with the main character because not only was he unlikable, but I also felt like I could not root for him. I don't mind unlikable characters, but in order to engage with them, I feel like I need to root for them to get through the plot, and I didn't feel that way about this main character. So unfortunately, the story just wasn't really working for me, and I ended up putting it down. Also from my 2024 TBR was Sister Maiden Monster by Lucy A. Snyder. This was recommended to me from Chelsea at Read Chelsea Read, and I knew going into this book that it was very divisive. It had a lot of mixed opinions, and as you can tell since I DNF it, I fell towards the negative side. Another one where the writing style was not working for me. I felt like the author did a lot of info dumping when it came to this dystopian pandemic world she had created, but as I continued and we started to get into the actual plot of the story, I felt like a lot of the themes that were being brought up were just very ham-fisted in. And then I do remember there was this specific element with the main character we were following, Erin, that just really rubbed me the wrong way. I'm not even gonna get into it because I'll end up ranting for a while, but I did read this for my 72 hours in the Reading Nook vlog, so if you're interested in a rant, I'll put a link to that in the cards. In that same video, I actually ended up DNFing Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett, and this one kind of fell down for me, not because of the main character Emily, who I've seen has elicited mixed reactions from a lot of readers, but I actually had the hardest time with the love interest character in this, and I'll never forget his name because it was so silly, Wendell Bamblebee. Emily's very autistic coded, and it really felt like Wendell was taking advantage of her and holding his position of power over her, which I just did not like, and that is such a negative foot to start on when you're supposed to be developing a romance with these two characters. Instantly made me hate everything about him, and I could not see my feelings feelings ever changing when it came to the romance, so I didn't really see a point in continuing with this book. I put it down and I have no regrets about that. I DNF'd 2 books in March and they were both romances. First one I'm still a little bummed about because I was really excited by the prospect of this book, and that was The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston, where we were following this woman who actually has the ability to see ghosts, and her father has recently passed. She returns home to, you know, take care of his funeral and see her family, and ends up seeing the ghost of her new editor. I liked that kind of magical realism aspect of the story, but I don't think Florence, the main character, needed a romantic partner. This girl needed a therapist. I ended up having a very difficult time with this one because although I like heavy themes in my romances, heaviness gets offset by the romance itself, and I felt nothing when it came to the romance developing here. I do remember the comedy in this was like peak millennial humor, which does work for me, and the main character Florence is like very much a manic pixie dream girl sort of stereotype at the start, and so I liked the idea of diving more into her character. But again, I felt nothing about the romance, and the story itself was just getting really depressing, so I put it down, and I'm still bummed about it. I'm not sure if I'll try out more from this author. I'm still very on the fence. Other romance I DNF'd in March though, I am still considering returning to this author's work. I think I'm just gonna start at the beginning of the series. Jumping into the middle was where this bit me in the ass. I tried to read If Only You by Chloe Leese, which I believe is like the 6th book in her Bergman Brothers series, and we're following a romance between, what's her name, like Iggy, who I believe is autistic and is getting tired of her family infantilizing her, and she ends up having a romance with like her older brother's best friend, who has this like really bad boy image and is kind of needing to reform a little bit. Like I said, jumping into the middle of the series did not work for me. I didn't feel a connection with a lot of the characters, and particularly Iggy. I was really frustrated that she wasn't really doing herself any favors when it came to her family infantilizing her, and then the basis for the romance just seemed really contrived and silly in my opinion. I also was really unsure about dynamic between these 2 characters because I hadn't seen if they interact in any of the prior books. I believe in the first book, Iggy is supposed to be like a little kid, and you kind of see her grow up throughout the series. So I imagine if I start in the beginning, I'll actually have more of a basis to understand Iggy as a character, and also the relationship that develops between her and I think his name was Seb. But I have 20 million romance books on my TBR, and starting this series just has not happened yet. I also DNF'd another 3 books in April. That's interesting. I guess I had some months DNF'd a lot. The next one is also a romance book, and in an ironic twist, it was the first in a series, but honestly, I ended up kind of skipping it since I DNF'd it, but that was Neanderthal Meets Human by Penny Reed, and is the first book in her Knitting in the City series. I love the Winston brothers by the same author, and this series is actually her prequel. I think it's the 4th book, follows the sister of the Winston brothers. So I started with this one, and I pretty immediately had a hard time with it because of the characterization of both the male and female main character. Janie also felt like a bit of a manic pixie dream girl, but I appreciated that like the not like other girls energy of this time period wasn't over the top with her character. Did not love the number of negative comments she makes about her body, however, though I do again think it kind of makes sense for like the time period this book was written. I also was just really frustrated by how her character development was being done within the like scheme of the plot. She's saying she's tired of everybody babying her and taking care of her. She's going to be a strong independent woman and like make her own decisions, yada yada yada. But then quite quickly in the plot, she backslides. Like she doesn't make any of her own decisions. She lets the male main character do all of this for her, and it seemed really silly. Plus the male main character, oh my gosh, he's just like the perfect embodiment of everything I hate in alpha characters. Over the top, strong silent type, really dominant personality. And then there's this ongoing thing of him like purposefully misleading her, and it was like starting to veer into like sexual harassment territory, and I just did not like that. So I put that one down. I've since read the 2nd book in that series and actually liked it a lot more, and I am planning to continue the series at some point. I'm just gonna forget this first book exists though. The next one is also another romance book, and that was The Single Dad's Club by Teresa Bari, which I was really excited going into because it seemed really cute. The titular aspect of the plot is not nearly as prevalent in the story as I was expecting. I was kind of picturing something reminiscent of like The Dad's Club in What to Expect When You're Expecting, and this did not give me that. The romance between the 2 main characters here felt weirdly insta-lust while also being very slow burn because of assumptions each of them keep making. Then there were a lot of internal arguments in both of their perspectives of why they can't date this person. Most of the arguments didn't even really make sense, and so this just ended up going in circles and getting really repetitive. I just lost interest in the romance, so I ended up putting this one down, unfortunately. I do have a few others from this author on my TBR, and I am going to try them out. Fingers crossed that they go better than this first one did. Last one of April honestly isn't super surprising because it is a cozy mystery, although I did think the historical Harlem Renaissance setting would be interesting. But Dead Girls by 𝗖cie ich𝘁𝗰𝘁 just did not go anywhere. It didn't change my trend of not liking cozy mysteries. The pacing was so jumpy, which then made every single chapter feel really separate from the prior chapter. I could not get connected to the main character or any of her relationships. And then the mystery itself honestly felt really obvious. I mean, I did end up DNFing this, so I don't actually know what the solution was. I don't know who was behind everything. The way the foreshadowing was happening was just so obvious that I could guess. And I'm pretty certain I probably am right. I also could not get past the fact that the name for the perpetrator that the press came up with was the Girl Killer. It was really original. In May, I only had one DNF, and that was Lilith by Nikki Marmary. I think I picked this up for the Story Continued book club because it is a retelling the Jewish mythology around Lilith, who, if you're unaware, was supposed to be the first wife of Adam. I thought this would be really interesting and kind of scratch the same itch as like 𝗖cie by Madeline Miller, where we were diving into a female character who's very villainized in mythology and kind of viewing her story in a different lens, which this sort of was doing. And then along with that, looking at religious themes, which is also something I really enjoy in my stories. But I just had such a hard time with the book because I could not connect with Lilith. Plus the feminist themes were just really on the nose. Then I thought it was odd that the story, which is supposed to have basis in Judaism, actually had a lot of Christianity woven into the story. And it wasn't really giving me what I went into the story expecting. So I finally put it down. I also only had one DNF in June, and this one honestly hurt. I really did try to push myself through it. That was In the Ravenous Dark by A.M. Strickland. First off, I was annoyed by the fact that this kept getting sold as a polyamorous relationship when it is not poly at all. If anything, it's like a really contrived and silly love triangle that I was not convinced by. On top of that, one of the possible love interests is a 400-year-old ghost who is supposed to keep her in line, and it felt so icky, and the power imbalance there made me so uncomfortable. Plot was insanely slow moving. The writing was really flowery in a way that, yes, it was atmospheric, but also just felt like it was consistently dragging the story down. And then the world building was done in these giant info dumps. Honestly, it's very impressive that I read so far into this book. I think it's because I wanted to like it. I was 75% in when I DNF'd it. That 75% mark was when it finally felt like the plot was starting to develop into something. And even then, I didn't care enough to keep going. Yeah, this did not work for me. Two that I DNF'd in July are both by the same author. Yeah, it's a shame. So first one was Blood Heir by Ileana Andrews. I picked this up for my Buns N' Roses TBR jar challenge that I did earlier this year. And this was the highest rated book from this author that was the first in a series. Now, I did find out that this is technically a spin-off series. It is set in the author's Kate Daniels world. But I did see that you could read this first book without having read anything prior to the other books in the world and still understand everything, which is true. I just don't think you can really enjoy it if you haven't read everything else in the world, because it constantly felt like references to prior books. So even though I could follow the plot, I wasn't really enjoying it as much as somebody who probably has read all the other books in this world and already fallen in love with these characters. So then I put that one down and tried to read a different book by this author not set in the Kate Daniels world, and that was Burn for Me. I've had this one recommended to me by numerous people, and so I was really intrigued going in. And while there are aspects of this that I totally see why people recommended it to me, because it reminded me of the Charlie Davidson series by Dorinda Jones, which is one of my all-time favorites. Paranormal mysteries with a spicy romance, but oh my gosh, I could not with this love interest. I couldn't do it. I liked the female main character. I liked the mystery aspect. I liked the paranormal magic abilities that these characters had. Lord, this over-the-top alpha male has to be in charge. I really tried to push past it with him, but I hit a breaking point. Initially, I did like the fact that the female main character wasn't willing to bow down to him. She was definitely pushing against all of his machismo bullcrap. But they are forced to work together, and eventually it's like she does start to see him as charming. Can't help but deny that she's attracted to him. And I wasn't feeling that. So I knew the romance was going to drive me crazy, and I had to put this one down. Next one is also a romance. Wow, I DNF'd a lot of romance this year. I guess I'm just becoming more and more picky about what I read. So this one really hurt, actually. I had an advanced reader copy of Morbidly Yours by Ivy Fairbanks. The setup of this sounded so cute, peak opposites attract. I mean, the male main character owns a funeral parlor, and then the female main character's husband recently passed. So there was an opportunity for a lot of heavy themes in this romance story, while also having a cute romance develop. And I mean, the cover of this book is absolutely adorable. I was so excited going into it. And it hurt even more that like the first 75 pages of this book were going so well. I was really having a good time. The death and funeral puns, honestly, loved them. And then again, the opposites attract thing all over it was so great for me. The plot that was developing though, did not realize the turn this story was going to take. Callum's grandfather put a stipulation in his will that if he is not married by 35, then the funeral home is going to go to Callum's father, who plans to sell it off. Unfortunately, Callum is demisexual and pretty sheltered when it comes to romance. Though he does become quite smitten with Lark, he still has a lot of hangups when it comes to relationships. And then Lark, by extension, she's trying to help him go out on dates with other women and kind of get past some of the hurdles he has when it comes to making connections. All the while, these two are just falling for each other more and more. And every single situation where they end up together alone felt like a date. It was hitting the point where all of the excuses they were giving of why they couldn't be together and why this wasn't romantic, this was just purely platonic, felt so silly and so contrived, and it was driving me crazy. Honestly, instead of whatever was happening here, I wish this would have gone for like a marriage of convenience route. I would have liked that so much more. Also in August, I DNF'd another romance, and it was actually another one for my Buns and Roses project. But this one, I think it was more just the tropes being utilized here were not my type. That was The Rough Rider by Maisie Yates. And I was really impressed with the character work in this one, actually. Initial setup of the story, I was enjoying. The tropes of age gap and then this possessive jealousness that we see from both characters, just very much didn't enjoy either of those. But what was working for me in the writing was going very well. So I will be checking out more from this author. I'm just gonna have to kind of pick and choose what tropes I go for. However, she has a giant backlist, so I don't think that's gonna be very hard. Oh, this next one in September hurt so much because this was from one of my 5-star authors. This is from an author I absolutely love. In fact, I'm hoping to reread one of her books this month, and that was Lady Macbeth by Ava Reed. I read this for an anticipated releases vlog. I think I shot myself in the foot because I initially planned to read this book and come out with that video pretty soon after it came out. That kept not happening. I kept procrastinating, and so the video kept getting pushed back, and the more I pushed it back, the more I saw other negative reviews coming out, and I do think those started to cloud my enjoyment a little bit. But even still, I just didn't like the way the themes that were being woven into the story were handled. A lot of those were very similar to Reed's prior work, A Study in Drowning, which I adored. I absolutely ate that up. But in this one, they just felt really heavy-handed, really over the top, and didn't feel like there was additional nuance there. Drive more discussions and more commentary around those topics. So I wasn't enjoying it. Plus, I had a really hard time with the female main character here, and she wasn't developing into a character I wanted to watch. I wanted to continue seeing their story. I'm still heartbroken over it. I am, honestly. It hurts so much. This next one I DNF'd, and I actually am going to be utilizing it in a video next year. So I guess keep your eyes peeled. But it was Behind Closed Doors by B.A. Paris. I picked this up for Spookopoly, and this was a really hyped thriller a good few years ago, so I've been wanting to try it out. It fell down for me because it was just so obvious immediately what was going on here. I mean, the tagline alone kind of tells you what to expect from this domestic thriller. The way the author was handling that in the story just didn't feel authentic. A little too over the top. It made the like villain character very cartoonish. Like, you know, he's just twisting his mustache and laughing maniacally. I didn't care to watch this play out, so I put it down. So we're actually at the end of the year here. In November, I DNF'd 3 books, and one of them that I'm still heartbroken over because I really thought I was gonna love this book. I read it for my mythology retelling 5x5, The Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Su Lin Tan. I'd heard the writing in this was very beautiful and very prosy. Obviously, the video it was included in, I knew is based on Chinese mythology, and mythology is a buzzword for me, but not long into reading it, I realized this just was not gonna work. I think a big issue of this book was that it was marketed as an adult high fantasy, but rather it read like a young adult fantasy story, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but the marketing affects your expectations, and I did not go into this book expecting a young adult fantasy story. While I did like the flowery descriptions and the purple prose writing, I unfortunately felt like the dialogue was really awkward and very stilted. By extension, I felt the characters were that way as well. I didn't really connect with anybody, and our female main character that we're following, it was frustrating to me that the way the story was playing out, we were time skipping over moments where we would really get to see some development of her character, and also some development around the romance that was being sold to us. It got put down, and I won't be picking it back up. Next up was a book that I picked up because I went to Y'all Fest. I talked about this in my November reading vlog, and that was The Lies We Tell by Katie Zhao. This is an author that writes YA mysteries, and I've been intrigued by her stuff because of her Instagram reels, if I'm being honest. And while I've heard a lot about her debut work, I hadn't heard much about this one, so I decided to pick it up, and unfortunately, another one where the writing style just didn't work for me. This is supposed to be a young adult story, but the main character is 18 going into college. However, she read like a very sheltered 13-year-old, and that just got very grating to me. It was actually one of 2 books that I read in November that started making me question whether or not I am aging out of young adult. Still a little bummed though, because I had been wanting to check out this author's work, but off of how this one went, I'm very hesitant to see anything else from her when it comes to young adult mystery stories. And on that note, the last book that I DNF'd this year was an author that I've realized we don't work together. And so it was my second chance with her. Not gonna give her another one. That was The Midnight Feast by Lucy Foley. I was really hesitant about this after I tried The Paris Apartment earlier this year, and I was right to be hesitant. So this actually got picked for a book club that I do in real life with a few friends. I had a very hard time with how this author lays out the plot for her story. I could not connect with any of the characters. I also realized that I don't really like the system that this author tends to do, where you don't know who the victim is, you don't know what actually happened, you just know something happened to someone in this cast of characters, watching everything unfold as you lead up to that point. I don't like that. I don't get invested when that happens. I want to know who is the victim and what happened, and then, you know, let's watch everything unfold to figure out how and why. But I just did not care to figure out the how, the why, the who, or the what. The story was super slow moving. I think I was like 69% in, and I still just did not care. I actually ended up asking somebody to spoil what took place for me, and I don't feel like the finale of what went on was worth pushing through. So like I said, this is an author that I think I can officially write off. I don't think Foley's writing of mysteries works for my taste. And so that is it. Please don't hate me for DNFing a book that you loved. Just a reminder, we're all readers. Reading is subjective. We all have our own tastes. And unfortunately, these 21 books just did not work for me. But if they worked for you, I'm so happy for you. On that note, that is it for today, y'all. Thank you so much for coming to my channel. I really appreciate it. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, leave me the red X emoji in the comments. I have all my socials as well as a few ways you can support me linked in the description. I come out with videos on Monday and Friday, but until then, I hope that you continue to have a terrific day. Love you, bye!